That time I got reincarnated as a demon lord. English, by LordedoMal44. 46 The Ogre Village Battle P5 The Ogress backed away with all her might, dodging yet another of the Majin's deadly attacks by just a hair's breadth. Her vision was still partially tinted red, the result of the first attack that she barely dodged in time, but she still managed to fight. Of course, again, at the place where the Majin attacked, a huge gust of wind suddenly arose, and the force was so strong that it created a crater in the ground. The first time she nearly got hit was when she tried to charge straight ahead, and the end result was a total failure. A single enemy attack, which was purposefully made easy to predict, and she nearly died. No, her strength seemed to be regulated correctly, it wouldn't kill her. Even so, if that attack had landed, her bones would have broken and no doubt she would have been unconscious after that. Of course, her current situation wasn't much better. Bleeding from the head from the blow that partially landed, the ogress was uncertain how she still retained consciousness. If she had to kick, then it was only her desire to fight and her willpower that kept her from falling. Despite that, she now understood the Majin's superiority. She really hadn't taken the fight seriously, and no doubt she could defeat her and her father in a heartbeat. Even so, she wouldn't give up so easily. Flanking the Majin once more, the ogress went towards the Majin's back, trying to attack her from a place where she didn't have a clear view. Of course, magicule perception would allow a person to see 360 degrees and with incredible accuracy, but doing so was taxing on the mind. That's why it was more common for people to rely on their normal eyes and just use the basics of spell perception. Unfortunately, that wasn't the Majin's case, and she realized it before she even attacked. Abruptly turning her body, the ogress used all the strength on her toes as she forced a battle instant movement to launch herself away. In the next moment, right where she would have been, a gust of wind hit the ground and threw the rocks away due to the force. And the Majin hadn't even moved to launch such an attack. After all, what is this woman? She is too strong. There's no way she's lived in the same woods as me for all this time and I've never heard from her. The ogress had already tried to attack at close range using every attack method she knew. His strength and her speed, however, were all easily surpassed by the Majin. If she could get close enough to attack, then the Majin would defend her club with just one hand, if she didn't get hit first. I'll have to attack from afar and create an opening. With that thought in mind, the ogress spurred even more momentum to her feet and dashed away, trying to get out of the Majin's magic perception range. If she could do that, and relentlessly attack from out of range, while being prepared to charge in tandem with her attacks, she might surprise the Majin. Well, she regretted that decision soon after actually. As soon as she was far enough away, when she prepared to attack, the ogress was able to see how a sphere of light was approaching her. It was moving so fast, and she barely had time to figure out what it was before following what her instincts screamed at her and getting out of the way. It was for a fraction of a second. The sphere passed right next to the ogress's face and collided with a tree that was on her side. Soon after, she was blown away by the explosion. Once the attack was released, the ogress felt how compressed that magic was. No, to tell you the truth, that wasn't magic, but a kind of battle will. That was one of the battle wills made for mages, specializing in long-distance attack, which concentrated and manipulated energy. His father and mother were able to use battle will similar to this one, where they concentrated their aura into their fists and then fired the long-range attack, being able to attack the enemy without getting close. In fact, compared to something like this, she still had a lot of room to grow. But still, even she who was inexperienced and still couldn't use that power could see how this attack and what her parents did was different. His parents' battle will was made up of a combination of physical strength and aura control, which could only be acquired through a lot of training. Despite this, it was still just enough aura condensing into its fists to create a bullet of energy, which would be launched in a straight direction and attack everything in its path with extreme force. What she just saw was completely different. That was a bullet made of aura that was filled with magic, making it half magic and half battle will. After that, the energy bullet was fired, and even as she moved, she was manipulated. This required the user not only to be able to manipulate their spells well around their body, but when they were far away as well. That was a monstrous level of control and precision, one she had never expected to achieve in her entire life. Until now, at least. How did you get so strong? If you were a man, maybe I would marry you, just for your strength. Of course, the ogress was joking. She wouldn't marry a person just because that person is strong. An example of this was her mother, who despite being strong married her father, who was weaker than her. Despite that, as an ogress, a monster, and an inhabitant of this world, she simply couldn't help but admire the strong. Despite this, the Majin seemed to take it seriously as, for the first time, she actually stopped to respond. I can become a man if you wish, but I would prefer it if you became one of Rimuru-sama's suitors. Like a person who managed to escape 50 of my attacks consecutively, and who kept up a fight with me for 10 minutes, I cannot help considering that you are the only ogress of considerable age and able to marry Rimuru-sama, at least among warriors. Suddenly, the Majin looked away, turning her attention to something farther away. She seemed to be looking in the direction where the head of the ogre village was, and soon her eyes turned to the place where the ogress's father was fighting Gobuta. The moment she saw this, the ogress charged forward, knowing that there would not be another chance as perfect to attack the Majin as there was now. It looks like Gobuta-kun has finished his work, although he doesn't seem to be in any condition to continue fighting. The final fight is approaching. Heedless of her words, knowing that nothing she does can change the results of another battlefield, the ogress decided to play her final card. Activating the ogre race's intrinsic skill, Ogre's Rage, the ogress felt her entire body get a boost in her capabilities. At the same time her vision turned red from the side effects of her skill. Of course, she was able to retain her consciousness to carry on the fight, at least for a little while, so she used this power boost to attack with all her strength, putting all her strength into one last desperate attack. She would most certainly not be able to fight after that, and would probably lose consciousness, but if she could get this Majin off the battlefield, then she would already be happy. Despite that, she wasn't surprised when the Majin turned and put her hand in the way to ward off her attack. Even so, she gave it her all in this attack, mustering every last bit of magic in her body and all of her strength, to the point where her veins started to stand out from the overexertion. What really surprised her was seeing the fruits of her labor when the Majin's arm exploded in several places. Not only that, multiple spots on the Majin's arm bent into strange shapes. Interesting. No pain, no fear, interesting, was all she got from the Majin, who watched helplessly as the club went towards her unprotected face now that her arm had failed to defend her attack. The ogress was happy to see this. After all, she was finally going to land an attack on an entity far superior to herself. Or so she thought, before the Majin disappeared in a blur. The ogress just had time to feel the Majin appear at her back just before a horrific pain shot through the back of her neck, and the ogress was immediately sent to the dream world. It was a miscalculation not to take into account the intrinsic skill, Ogre's Rage, and its effects. I should also have thought of countermeasures other than shock absorption. Despite that, the amount of damage was limited to overloading my own power, not the strength of the attack itself. I think I have to take that into account next time. The Majin. Seal muttered this to herself, seeing the ogress's unconscious body on the floor. Her ratings of the Agra, which were already quite high in every way, were elevated even more by seeing how she was able to go through unfathomable difficulty to defeat her opponents. Without a doubt, Seal mentally wrote down a name he would like for this ogress in the future, which he also placed on the harem list. Now, I must go to the last of the battlegrounds. Rimuru-sama can't wait to move anymore. Besides, I still need to test that apprentice priestess to see if she can join with the other pretenders. With just those words, Seal plunged into the shadows, taking with him the sleeping ogress, who, in the future, would come to be called Shein Tempest. The ogre was surprised, seeing how the shadows under Gobuta's feet moved. The shapes of various animals, some he recognized and others he only theorized what they were, moved in the shadows, but he couldn't say for sure why. Well, he could imagine that goblin before him, Gobuta, was also a user of a unique skill, so he was on guard against this skill and its possible effects. Listen carefully. My unique skill is called Tempest, the Night. Gobuta spoke these words loud and clear for Ogre to hear. There was clear hostile intent in his words, but the Ogre couldn't help but think how it made no sense that the goblin was openly talking about it. Who in their right mind would tell their enemy about their trump card? Why are you telling me this? Why won't it make a difference? Hearing this made the ogre even more alert against the goblin in front of him. It could be reality or arrogance, but one of those two things made the goblin confident enough to defeat an ogre even if his trump card was revealed. Either it was madness, or he was confident in his trump card, and the ogre felt he was second. This skill has something that even Rimuru-sama can't do. I haven't told him all the details, but I guess he can see it now. So how about we show him Su? As soon as the goblin said that, before the ogre's eyes, the goblin's armor dissolved into a kind of black smoke. It wasn't the same as the shadow at his feet, but it was similar. Smoke rose from the goblin's body and began to change shape, until it took on the shape of one of the giant ants that the ogre had seen in the forest many times. No, actually that was their evolution, the giant fire ants. At the same time, the goblin, who was left in that place, was wearing ordinary clothes, no longer his fancy armor, and the sword also looked simpler and less decorated. This skill allows me partial unification with my subordinates, all the mounts I have, and allows me to use their powers. Their skills, their aura and their physical capacity, all the power of my mounts becomes a part of me Su, and I become a part of them too Su. A smile, kinder and less arrogant, appeared on Gobuta's face as he said that. The ogre, on the other hand, was wide-eyed, clearly surprised that his opponent had such a skill. A skill like that should only be possible for spirits which could freely change their bodies, or occupy the same space. Even so, the goblin before him, Gobuta, smiled as he displayed a stolen skill that shouldn't be possible for any physical creature. Now, should I take it even more seriously than before? While asking that, the ant that was behind Gobuta moved towards him, as if it wanted to hit him, but instead, it hit his shadow. Surprisingly, and without the ogre even believing it was possible, the huge giant fire ant slipped into the goblin's shadow and disappeared from sight. And then, another shadow came out and took its place, this one in the shape of a tiger. When the ogre appeared, he thought it was a blade tiger, a forest animal that is a very dangerous monster. Despite that, there were many differences between the monster in front of him and the original form of such an animal. One of them was the lion's mane made of flames that surrounded its neck, a trait the species doesn't usually have, something the ogre had never seen before in his life. That's because this wasn't a blade tiger, but its evolved version, a crimson flame tiger. Taiga. Let's finish this bastard off, as if responding to Gobuta's words, Taiga, the crimson flame tiger, snarled for a moment before charging towards Gobuta and turning into smoke, the same smoke that the ant from before had been made from. Just the moment after the smoke enveloped Gobuta's body, just like before, his form changed, taking on a new form dedicated to combat. Now Gobuta was wearing what appeared to be red and black colored leather clothes with a mane of flames around his neck. The sword had changed shape, having a tiger's arm on the hilt, and two saber-toothed tiger fangs protruding from the sides, as the tiger from before also had. Gobuta's eyes have also changed, being red in color and having the same vertical division as a cat's. And then? How about we test my power? Gobuta didn't wait for an answer, he tightened his grip on his sword and charged forward. The ogre was impressed by the way Gobuta advanced at high speed towards him, as if he were a real cat. This was not a speed that a normal hobgoblin could acquire without using some skill, magic or battle will. The true speed that only an animal possesses. Despite this, the ogre did not lose confidence in himself. If Gobuta reached the speed of a monster because of his skill and his mount, then the ogre reached that speed because of his training and his battle wills. Without hesitation, the ogre swung his hammer and parried the goblin's sword attack. The attack itself was much lighter than before when he was in ant form, but the ogre sensed the presence of a different problem this time. Warm. Before he should have the intrinsic skill, Herculean strength, of the giant ants, but now he's enveloping his sword with fire. Is this the tiger's intrinsic skill? The ogre thought about this as he parried two more attacks from Gobuta, but before he reached a third he was forced to retreat. With each swing, the heat of the flames built up in his weapon, and the fact that the goblin didn't move away while he attacked didn't help with that temperature. As the ogre thought about how he should deal with the goblin charged forward once more, clearly not wanting to give him time to think. Tisk. Damn. I guess I have no option. I'll have to use my skills and attack from afar, with all my skills. With that in mind, the ogre waited for a small opening, still feeling the heat of the fire build up, and when the opening was made the ogre used the handle of his hammer to push his opponent as far as he could. He wouldn't have much of a chance to go on, even if he beat this goblin, after all he had already been badly wounded. Even so, out of his pride as an ogre, he would give his all to win this fight, even if his opponent was just a goblin. Well, it was a goblin and one of the enemy generals, so he must have regained some pride by defeating him. I hope you can bear this, boy. I don't want to kill Akami-chan's boyfriend. Right after saying that, the ogre threw his hammer in the air, drawing the goblin's attention upwards. A big rookie mistake. A person cannot focus his attention on two vertical points, so once he shifted his field of vision to the hammer, he lost sight of it. That single careless moment, where he took his eyes off him, would be the end of the battle. Still with empty hands, the ogre started to gather his aura in his hands, but unlike before, the amount of aura he had gathered was different. It was smaller than the previous one, but this aura was more concentrated, making its strength in no way inferior to all the blows he had landed on Akami. And then, as the goblin turned its eyes on him once more, startled to realize the trap he had fallen into, he launched his attack. Chokuzuki. The ogre's punch traveled, at high speed, towards the goblin, who in shock used his sword to block his enemy's attack. A large amount of aura joined his sword, and a shock wave was formed there, which collided against his Chokuzuki in midair. A huge explosion formed. The ogre's Chokuzuki and the attack the goblin used, the intrinsic skill that tigers have, shockwave roar, collided and exploded in midair, cancelling each other out. Well, actually, although both attacks had the same power, the ogre was far away from the attack's location, but the goblin didn't have time to launch its defense, thus being caught by the resulting explosion. Besides, it's not like it ended just there. Following up with Chokuzuki, a basic yet powerful move, the ogre launched blow after blow non-stop at the goblin, launching each attack after the other like a machine gun. That speed, when compared to the speed at which the goblin was able to swing its sword, far outweighed any defense the goblin put up. Before the fifth attack, the goblin had been unable to parry the ogre's punches and was thrown back hard, feeling all the damage from the attack. His mount, Taiga, also seemed to be affected by the damage, and their combined form fluctuated for a moment, almost threatening to disappear. And one attack, repeated after another, the Gobuta continued to be mercilessly pushed back with brutality. "Hey boy! Don't die!" The ogre shouted this and dashed towards Gobuta, stopping his barrage of blows. Gobuta was able to recover slightly, and before he even got to his feet, Gobuta felt that the ogre had jumped in the air, grabbed the hammer that had been spinning in the air for a few seconds, and it swooped down towards him, ready to throw a blow with the hammer. Gobuta didn't even have time to think. He just took his sword, coated it with shockwave roar, and used his fire manipulation to create flames around the attack, launching his own attack at the enemy hammer. Both attacks collided. The ogre's hammer broke after this attack, not taking all the combat damage, and part of the explosion knocked him back. Gobuta's sword, which was one of the effects of his unique skill, Tempest, the Knight, broke and a huge amount of damage was received, while his body was pushed into the ground. If it wasn't for Taiga holding the combined form in place, and using as much of his power as he could to fend off the attack, then maybe Gobuta, in his base form, really would have died from the explosion resulting from that combined attack from the two of them. Even so, looking at the current situation, the fight ended in a draw. Ha 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 ha. Damn, you didn't dodge. Are you really that crazy? I thought I'd dodge? But to survive after an attack like that? The ogre shouted this, laughing in delight as he watched Gobuta. Gobuta, on the other hand, looked at him like he was looking at a madman, clearly freaked out by the idea that this guy expected him to dodge that attack. He almost fainted at that time. It was an impossible mission to dodge. If it was up to this ogre, then he would be dead. Still, to imagine that you survived. Boy, I made up my mind. You and that girl will learn from us. Regardless of how this fight ends, whether the boss leads us or not, I'll make sure the ogres teach you some things. Gobuta just looked at the ogre in front of him like he was crazy, wishing he would shut up. Furthermore, he also wished he had brought another healing potion with him. I think, finally, I can start acting.